Another one of the questions coming out of the election concerns the filibuster. Everyone's wondering what the Republicans in the Senate will do in regards to the filibuster, considering the modifications to it that the Democrats instituted thanks to some of the obstructionism on the part of the Republicans. Now, the filibuster is an interesting sort of historical construct. It obviously has a massive impact in the last few years in terms of what it takes to get legislation passed, but it is not what it used to be. And so before we speculate about what will happen to it in the future, let's talk about what has happened to it in the recent past. Here's an interesting little fact for you. There were more filibusters as measured by votes to end a filibuster between 2009 and 2010 than there were in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s combined.
Both sides do it. Both sides do it, John.
Both sides do it. It's odd that the Democrats were filibustering so much of their own stuff from 2009 to 2010. That must be what's happening. Let's show you a visualization of that. Here's the growth of filibusters over time.
Look at that. Look at that. Both sides do it.
Both sides do it. And that line is blue, which implies to me it's got to be the Democrats. That's not actually the case. Some information about the actual effect during the last few years. Every piece of Obama's agenda in the first 2 years of his presidency, from the stimulus to Obamacare, the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill, which would seem to many casual observers to be important, was subjected to a 60-vote threshold, the 60 votes necessary to break the assumed implicit and constant filibuster on the part of the Republicans. The 60-vote threshold was a major factor in the defeat of Obama's two other legislative priorities, cap and trade and immigration reform, which he's currently getting hammered on not making any progress on. Remember that it was blocked by the filibustering Republican minority. Republicans, in addition, blocked the confirmation of the CFPB director, Richard Cordray, for years, with Obama eventually being forced to make a recess appointment to get him in office. Enough nominees to the National Labor Relations Board were blocked that the agency, which is hugely important in preventing and punishing labor abuses, stopped functioning at all. Even cabinet appointees, from Labor Secretary nominee Tom Perez and EPA nominee Gina McCarthy, were being held up.
Jesus, both sides really do it.
Both sides do it.
Yeah.
Harry Reid blocking all those cabinet nominees.
So now we read in this story here that toward the end of the election, Bob Corker said he thought it was likely a GOP majority would reverse the filibuster rule changes that Harry Reid finally implemented. Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, all influential members, it reads here from the Vox piece, of the Republican caucus have said they would like the old rules restored.
So
that would speak well, because the
from
old rules...
those three, yes.
Right. If that happened, if the old rules were restored, then that would be good.
That would be good.
That
We didn't want
right
that to be changed in the first place.
Right. And
well, let's make clear what that change is. And so effectively, over the past few years, the Democrats in the Senate changed the filibuster in regard to the nomination process. So you still have the traditional filibuster requiring 60 votes to break it for legislation, but when it comes to judicial and executive nominees, the threshold is now down to just a majority in the Senate. And so restoring the old rules would be reversing the Democratic changes of the past few years. But we have laid out why those changes seem to be incredibly necessary.
And if you want to go ahead and call me a hypocrite by saying I hope they make those changes now because it will help, I'm not hypocritical to the process. I don't really care about the process. I'm interested in the result, and I'm interested in positive change for the country.
Yeah.
So I'm not being hypocritical on that. So, but here's what's going to happen. No one is going to advocate going back to the old rules.
Well, supposedly those three have, and they're relatively big names. You don't think they're going to continue?
No, not going to do it. It's just not going to be an issue. It's not going to be that, you know, they'll get around it by saying, well, I'd like us to go back to the old rules, but mostly we're going to follow the agenda set by our leader in the Senate. It's not up to me. If it were up to me, I'd do it, but
yeah.
Hey, what are you going to do? So they'll quiet, they won't push for it, they won't complain about it, and that issue will die, because why on earth would Republicans do it now? First of all, it's not that big a deal, because right now, Obama's major pieces of legislation have very little chance of even getting 50 votes. So the only issue for this really is what happens when the big issue for this is what happens when one party controls all three, not all three houses, but controls both houses of Congress and the White House.
Yeah,
so I don't hold your breath for Paul, Graham, and McCain. If any of them does still, it would probably be McCain, who's comfortable being a cranky old man.
Yeah, look, I didn't want the rules to have to be changed in the first place, but as we laid out, they needed to be changed. I mean, it's one thing to say, look, I can't allow this bill to pass. It's bad for the country, it's bad for my constituency, or whatever, I'm going to filibuster it. But they were filibustering just all judicial nominees, executive positions that, when they went to a vote, would overwhelmingly succeed with the majority of Republicans voting for that person. It wasn't that they opposed the actual person or what they stood for, it's that they opposed Barack Obama. They were using what is supposed to be a rule to allow, in the most extreme cases, the minority to exert their will. They were using it as the governing tool by which the country accomplishes things, or more likely, doesn't accomplish things. And we showed you the chart of it going up, and it got to the point where one of the most frustrating things for me personally over the past few years is that legislation was failing because it didn't reach the 60 vote threshold. And that's what they would say. It didn't reach the threshold. They didn't say that the Republicans were filibustering all these bills because that would make the Republicans look bad. They were just pretending as if suddenly you need 60 votes, and that's normal.
We were just pretending as if we had 119 senators.
Exactly, and perhaps someday we will, but right now we have 100, and they wouldn't even say it. And I understand from the point of view of the people writing these articles and talking about it on the news, it gets annoying to have to constantly use the phrase filibuster and talk about not breaking the filibuster and talk about cloture. But the reason that the filibuster didn't used to be common is because there was a political price to be paid when you used it. You had to stand up there and talk and look possibly like an extremist and possibly look like an obstructionist, because in many cases that's what you were. When they don't point out that you're filibustering, when they don't make you actually speak, and it's just an assumed 60 vote threshold, then suddenly the minority effectively has at least as much power as the majority in the country, and that's not the way the Constitution set things up.